Now, a campaign started in the East Midlands to persuade the government to recognise one of the worst famines in history as genocide. Millions of people died in Ukraine in the 1930s when the Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin forced through the collectivization of the farms. The Ukrainian community here wants official recognition of the famine. Des Coleman went to the Ukrainian centre in Derby to find out more and to get a taste of Ukrainian culture.
It's incredible, isn't it? These young Ukrainians are dancing to keep alive a joyous part of their culture. But when they're not dancing, they're campaigning to keep alive a tragic part of their history. The dancers may have been born and bred in Derby, but they're keen to keep their Ukrainian heritage alive. And they all know what happened in the Ukraine during what they call the Holodomor.
The Holodomor is basically two Ukrainian words. Holod means starvation and mority means suffering to kill. And basically the Holodomor signifies the Ukrainian tragic famine of 1932-1933, which we call now as Ukrainian genocide, where up to 10 million people died, a third of them children.
You tell me about this. Nadia Surma was brought up in Ukraine under the Soviets. She remembers the stories handed down through the family.
Soviets came, they just would take everything. My mom would tell me that they would come and they will say, all the seeds, potato, flour, they have taken everything. And people were starving and dying, especially children and elderly people.
In the UK especially, the government hasn't yet recognised, whereas throughout the world, Canada, Australia, United States, they do recognise it. And so if those countries recognise it, why can't the UK? For me, I think they just don't want to upset the current Russian government, because it might upset the politics, but to me, that's the wrong decision.
The people here want to see what happened officially recognised as genocide. And now their case has been raised in Parliament.
The purpose of this debate today is to call on the United Kingdom government to officially recognise the dreadful and tragic part of Ukraine's history as genocide.
In reply to Pauline Latham, the government said it recognised the horror of what happened in Ukraine, but its hands were tied.
The Holodomor predated the establishment of the concept of genocide in international law, and it was not drafted to apply retrospectively. And it should be for judges rather than governments or non-judicial bodies to make such a designation of genocide.
So, a cool reception from the government. Nothing cool about the reception you get here, though. I think I'm going to have a go. You ready?
And Des has been struggling to walk ever since then. Pauline, on a more serious note, I mean, this may have seemed to have happened a long, long time ago, but as we've seen in Des's report, it's still very much a live issue, isn't it, for Ukrainians here?
It is. I've had quite a lot to do with the Ukrainian community in Derby when I was mayor and since, and they do feel very strongly about the fact that it's never been recognised as a genocide, and it clearly was from all the reports and all the reports through various journalists that came out and people who lived through it. It was a genocide, and I think it's very disappointing that we're not going to recognise it.
Let's bring it up to date. You just touched on it. So are you disappointed by the government's rather legalistic approach?
Yes, I am. And to say that there was a United Nations Convention in 1948 that recognises them, and this happened before then, but so did the Holocaust, but we recognise that.
Why is this? Do you think the British government are slightly worried about Putin and the Kremlin?
I think there may be an element of that, which is disappointing because it's history. And, you know, if we can't recognise what happened in history, I think it's a very sad thing. And I think it's very sad for those Ukrainians who are fantastic citizens of this country. They just want some recognition, and many Commonwealth countries do recognise it as a genocide.
Absolutely. I mean, Australia, Canada, even the United States.
Yeah.
Graham, you've got a number of Ukrainians in your own constituency.
Indeed, it's very important we all remember our history. This is a genocide. It should be described as such. No problem about that. Straightforward as far as I'm concerned. But but let's also look at places like Rwanda and Yugoslavia. This happens in a lot of places, and we must remember that history. Even in Nottingham and Derby just 200 years ago, working people were hung on the steps of the courthouse, both in Derby and Nottinghamshire, for having the temerity to demand the vote. So we should all remember our history and learn from it.
But Rwanda has been recognised as a genocide, and that's since. But
quite right.
Just because this was before 1948, it should still be recognised, in my view.
So where does it go from here? Because you've had the parliamentary moment, as it were.
Yeah.
So some fairly heavy-duty lobbying still.
Yes, I think I will continue to do that and probably work with the all-party parliamentary group on the Ukraine, because I was talking to John Whittingdale last week about it, and he's still lobbying and trying to get it. So I don't think we'll give up on this. We'll keep going.
But how far do you go with this? Because there are other areas that might be regarded as genocide. I'm thinking, for example, the treatment of Native Americans in the US, treatment of Aborigines in Australia, even closer to home, the Irish potato famine.
Yes, of course, but I don't think they were genocides in the same way that this was a deliberate man-made genocide and famine. And I think they didn't just take all the seeds, they took all the grain, they got rid of all the animals, so people had nothing to eat except bark from trees, leaves, and the odd woodland animal that they could find. But the birds were killed, everything was killed.
Yeah, the key thing here is that it's the United Nations, isn't it? So it's when they introduce this kind of legal definition of genocide. So is the government right?
No, I don't think the government is right, but I think we, all of us, have a duty to try and nurture and cherish our democracy. And British democracy has been through the mill in recent times, but we really have to make sure that we are vigilant about our own democracy. All those examples you gave, John, are where dictatorships took over and imposed their will on people. We have some sort of inoculation against that because of our democracy, but we need to look after it in the future.
Very, very briefly, Pauline, I mean, what's been the reaction from the Ukrainian community? Do they feel disappointed?
I think they do. I spoke to the ambassador immediately after the debate, and he was encouraged by the words used by the minister, but they were words, they weren't action, and I think what they'd like is some action. And I'm visiting them in the summer, their summer camp, so I'll have a longer discussion with them then.
Okay, thank you very much indeed.